Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and we just got some new screenshots for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, from Nintendo's press site here. And looking at these new screenshots, at first glance you might think they look a lot like what we've seen before, but actually, they are improved, and in some cases, it's pretty substantial. So today what we're going to be doing is looking over the differences from the Switch 1 version, from what we've seen of some of the Switch 2 Edition footage, and then these new screenshots, because all three are different, and some of these differences, I would say, are actually pretty exciting. And I might even go so far to say could have some lore implications, which might seem a little crazy to you, but you'll see what I mean when we get there. So I'm first going to go over these different screenshots, comparing each one, talking about each one, but then afterwards I'll do some side-by-side comparisons, and you'll see the differences more clearly. So this here is a screenshot from the original Switch 1 trailer, Welcome to Vuros. And then here is the screenshot from the little bit of footage we got of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond during the Switch 2 Direct, showing off the Switch 2 Edition. And as you can see, there is a substantial improvement in just overall sharpness here. You can make out a lot more details. It's certainly a nice improvement. You can even see like light showing up in different places because of this. However, when we take a look at these recent new screenshots, there is even an improvement over what we saw of the Switch 2 footage back in April. So you might look at it and be like, okay, there is a little bit of a difference. There's a slight angle change here, but the bigger difference here is that things look a lot more clear, and they're a little brighter as well. So looking at this version that's still from Switch 2, you'll notice there's a lot more blacks where you can't quite make out a lot of details. And what's interesting about this is that I remember with the Treehouse footage that came out for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, we saw that footage and we compared it to the first trailer we got for Metroid Prime 4 last year of the actual gameplay, and there is a substantial difference in detail, clarity, but also just the overall color was a lot darker. And so something that should be noted here is that over this last year, there may have been changes to the overall look of Metroid Prime 4. And so coming back to these screenshots here, this is the Switch 1 version still, right? Then we look at the Switch 2 Edition, it still has that darkness. Maybe it's slightly darker, maybe the blacks are a little bit more apparent, but overall that same level of darkness or a similar level of darkness is there. It's just a lot sharper. However, in this new footage, it's no longer so dark. And with that lack of darkness, there are other details that are more apparent. You can see in between Samus's shoulder plate and breastplate, you can see the black areas in there that were not apparent in the prior footage of the Switch 2 edition of Metroid Prime 4. And so what I'm wondering about here is maybe they went in a direction of darkening certain parts of Metroid Prime 4 to obscure a lack of detail in the Switch 1 version so it could hold up better, but now they've had more time to work on the Switch 2 edition, they've brightened things up a bit to showcase more of the details. That might be the case. Or not, I'm just speculating on why they would have gone through these changes. Maybe it has something to do with sorting out high dynamic range. Regardless, more details are apparent here. So for example, look at Samus's arm. You can see like an angular texture upon her arm here where the tricep would be, that tricep area. That's not apparent even in the Switch 2 edition screenshot we had. You can't really tell. So there are details that we are seeing here with this new screenshot, even over the prior Switch 2 version of Prime 4. Now look at Samus's arm can. You can see the top area actually has additional ridges now, or at least you can tell there are ridges there, unlike before. Also notice to the side of Samus's arm cannon here, you can make out actual details of wear and tear, some scuffing of the metal. It's a nice touch. And something else that's become apparent are the rock textures. The rock textures, well, yeah, they look clear, but there are other parts, there seems to be something else going on there. Like, you look at this rock to the left of Samus, and you can almost make out, like, some sort of, like, fossilized circuitry or metal plating. And I think this is interesting from a theory lore perspective, because what happened to this world of Vuros in the past? In the opening segment of Metroid Prime 4, we see that something happens with that artifact where there's this giant flash, and then we find Samus later on in Vuros. So some have theorized that Samus teleports elsewhere, but what if she's in the same place and simply a great amount of time has transpired since. And maybe that's something to do with why we see some of the Galactic Federation equipment and mechs throughout the footage of Metroid Prime 4, because, well, a lot of time has passed since this initial event, and this is all meant to take place here. Perhaps. Regardless, it does seem like that there is some evidence of some technology from way back in the past that has since been fossilized. Now moving on to his next set of screenshots here, this isn't an exact one-for-one shot, it's just the closest approximation I could get from the Switch 1 footage we have, and as you can tell, yeah, there is a huge difference in terms of overall resolution and detail, but let's also remind ourselves that there is such a thing as YouTube compression. Even with what you're seeing here, the level of detail that I'm noticing may not be as apparent for you, which is one of the reasons why I am uploading in 4K now, to minimize that compression as much as possible, but still there's going to be some compression here that will impact the overall quality of what we're seeing, and when we actually get to play the game, it's going to look better even on Switch 1. But still, you can make out such a substantial difference in detail when you look at the Switch 2 version. There's clearly a much higher level of resolution, but even like you look at plants like here to the right, in the Switch 1 version, we can see that plant, right? But now look at it in the Switch 2 edition that we saw a few months ago, and we can see that plant far more clearly. We can see the design of the leaves. It's nice. But now look at the recent screenshot of this same spot, and it's even more apparent. We can make out even more details. It's a little bit sharper. It's also a little bit brighter. Coming back to Samus's arm cannon here, you can more clearly make out the ridges on the top, you can more clearly make out some of the scuffing, but also where it was dark, there was a lot you could not see, and now you can. We can see that inside part of Samus's arm cannon, we can see like some sort of vent there, and also at the top part, you can actually make out like a circular pattern on metal, like we've seen circular patterns on metal before from factories. We can see a little bit of that here as well. And so there's maybe some potential lore implications here in the sense that there has been factory work done to Samus's equipment. Now, what's interesting about this is that Samus, her equipment's almost like part of who she is. It's not just like straight mechanical engineering science here. There's some magic behind it, right? There's some special Chozo spiritual essence there. So to see a little bit of some evidence of like just factory work is interesting. But also looking at the environment here, like looking at the rock and the tree to the right, you can just see more. Or even on the ground, there is a difference in quality. We can see and make out more details, and maybe this just has to do with a lack of compression here, but it's clear just how much detail is actually in this game. There is a lot here. And to be clear, there's definitely more going on than just less compression here, because as I said, there's literally a difference in lighting here, so we can see more in the dark areas for sure. But I'm just blown away by how much better this looks compared to this prior Switch 2 edition pick, which, by the way, I got at a higher resolution in hopes of mitigating some of that compression issue, and yet still clearly there is a nice improvement. Now here we do have a one-for-one for all three different versions. So this is the beginning of what we presume to be Vuros, and this is the Switch 1 version right here, right? Now look at the Switch 2 edition, and you can see like there's almost like they've just added more details. Like look to the left on the branches, like there's more like grass and foliage there, which is interesting. You can see literally more. You look at the ground, you can make out more details of the ground. You look at the background, and the background, it's clear that there's more that is visible off into the distance in the Switch 2 version. And then looking at the right, same deal, like you can literally see more of like the grass, the little vines and such. There's more going on here. But now let's look at the recent screenshot. And as you can see, it is lighter. We can see more details. The dark areas are less covered. But we can tell that, yeah, things still look a little bit better even in this version. It's not as pronounced. I would say where it's most obviously improving is to the side over here. You can see a lot of the lines and layers in the rock. It's a bit more clear than what we saw of the Switch 2 footage back in April. And I'm moving on to this final screenshot here. This is another one of those where we don't have one-for-one from the Switch 1 version, just a similar area. And as you see here, looks kind of blurry when we look at the Switch 2 version. Like, there's such a substantial leap here. Notice the leaves is the screenshot that just came out to the right. Like, we can tell how those look with great detail. Then we look at the Switch 1 version, it's a lot closer up, but it looks a lot messier by comparison. Like, it's just funny how when we see these higher resolution versions, like, all of a sudden the original version looks so bad. I remember when this footage came out for Switch 1, so there was like a week before, or a few days before the Switch 2 Direct, and we saw this trailer, and there was a lot of conversations of, oh, is this like footage of the Switch 2 version or something? And it wasn't. But that's how good we thought Metroid Prime 4 looked. But now that we have a comparison to the actual Switch 2 version, there's clearly such a substantial difference here, it's kind of crazy. But then looking at the Switch 2 version we saw back in April versus what we see here, it's still a little sharper. We can make out just a little bit more of the ground, of the branches off into the background. You see where that enemy is evaporating, right, to the left. You'll notice the branch to your right, you can actually see a little bit more of it. I mean, even you can see a little bit more clearly the specks that are evaporating from the enemy in the back in this latest screenshot, I mean. Or even look at the trees off into the distance, right? We can make out more of what's off into the distance. Like, I can see a little bit more of the tops of those trees and canopies off into the background. Or the structure to the right, given that there's a little bit of a brightness shift here, we can actually see a little bit past some of the darkness. We can make out a little bit more of those textures upon those structures off into the distance to the right. You can even make out more details of the skin of the monster in front of us. Like, there's just more going on there when we look at the most recent screenshot comparison even to the Switch 2 version. Of course, the Switch 1 version, there's a lot you can't tell based off how blurry it is from the screenshot at least, which again, I feel like has been compressed greatly from YouTube, but still, there is a substantial difference here. And in general, just looking at this screenshot and the other screenshots, the Switch 2 version that we saw back in April seems softer than we're looking at here with these latest uncompressed screenshots from the press site. How much of that is compression, how much of that is an improvement, it's hard to say, but there are clearly, literally objective differences here that go beyond just compression issues. So I would say it does appear like some work has been done since, but regardless, at the very least, we're getting a more clearer view of how Metroid Prime 4 looks, and it does look really good. The Switch 2 version is substantially better looking than the Switch 1 version, which is already a great looking game that some people, a year ago or even a few months ago, thought might still be somehow a Switch 2 version of the game. Which it was not. Now we see a Switch 2 version, and it looks noticeably better, especially when you put them side by side. So with that said, I'll end it with a few side-by-sides here so you can take a look at them. But thank you all so much for listening and watching. This is AndresRestart, and I'll see you all really soon.